A wedding photograph from 1895 sits in an archive, yellowed at the edges, the subjects frozen in a moment of Victorian formality. At the center of the frame stand Adelina and Ricardo, bride and groom, surrounded by family members. Rebecca stands to the bride's left, her hands folded neatly. Eduardo, the groom's brother, occupies the right side of the frame. Everyone wears the dark, heavy fabrics typical of the era. The men are in stiff collars and wool suits. The women are in high-necked dresses with tight sleeves. No one smiles. This is expected. What catches the eye, however, is something about Adelina herself. Her posture is exceptionally rigid. Her eyes seem unfocused, distant, as if looking through the camera rather than at it. Her hands rest in an unnaturally precise position. Compared to the others in the photograph, there is a stillness to her that feels different. It is subtle, but it is there. The photograph has gained notoriety online. The reason is a claim that has spread across forums, social media posts, and viral videos. The story attached to this image is disturbing. According to the tale, Adelina was not alive when the photograph was taken. The claim goes further. It insists that she had died and been buried the day before the photograph was staged. The wedding, according to this narrative, was a grotesque memorial. The bride was propped up, dressed, and positioned alongside her living groom and family for a final, macabre portrait. The story has been shared thousands of times. It has been cited as proof of Victorian death customs gone too far. But is it true? How could such a thing be possible? Was this photograph a hoax, meticulously constructed in the darkroom? Was it a simple misunderstanding of customs from over a century ago? Or is it evidence of something far stranger, a practice so unsettling that modern audiences struggled to believe it was real? These are the questions that demand investigation. The goal is clear: separate fact from fiction. Determine what this photograph truly shows. To do this, the inquiry must be guided by experts who understand the Victorian world, its technologies, and its rituals. Dr. Killian Thorne, a historian specializing in 19th century culture, is the first to weigh in. He explains that while the story seems fantastic, it touches on a very real practice from the Victorian era. That practice was post-mortem photography, and to modern eyes, it is deeply unsettling. Dr. Thorne begins by tracing the digital footprint of the photograph. The image first appeared on a genealogy form in the early 2000s. From there, it was picked up by blogs dedicated to unusual historical photographs. Then it spread to social media. With each share, the story grew. New details were added: the burial, the propping, the idea that the family went through with a wedding ceremony for a corpse. The narrative became more gothic, more elaborate. But the investigation cannot rely on internet lore. It must examine two separate tracks. The first is the photograph itself, the physical evidence. The second is the paper trail, the historical record that might confirm or debunk the story. The physical investigation begins with the image. Grady Ellison, a forensic photo analyst with decades of experience, examines a high-resolution scan of the photograph. His first task is to authenticate it. Is this genuinely from 1895, or is it a modern fake? He studies the photographic process. The paper stock, the albumin coating, the fading patterns all match the mid-1890s. The clothing is accurate. The studio backdrop is consistent with the period. There is no evidence of digital manipulation, because the photograph predates digital technology by a century. Next, Grady looks for signs of composite photography. In the Victorian era, it was possible to combine two separate images in the darkroom. A deceased person could be photographed separately and then superimposed onto a family portrait. But the analysis shows no such tampering. The photograph is a single, original exposure. Everyone in the frame was present at the same moment. This finding leads directly to the central controversy. Postmortem photography was a real and widespread practice in the Victorian era. Dr. Thorne explains why it existed. In the 19th century, child mortality was tragically high. Diseases like scarlet fever, diphtheria, and tuberculosis claimed lives quickly. Photography was still a new technology, expensive and rare. For many families, a post-mortem photograph was the only image they would ever have of a loved one. It was not considered morbid. It was an act of remembrance, a way to preserve the memory of someone who had passed. The photographs were often staged to make the deceased appear lifelike. Children were posed in cribs, as if sleeping. Adults were positioned in chairs, sometimes with their eyes painted open on the print to create the illusion of life. Posing stands, hidden behind the body, were used to keep the subject upright during the long exposure times required by early cameras. Verified examples of post-mortem photography are not difficult to find. Museums and archives hold thousands of these images. They are haunting, but they are also deeply human. They show families gathered around a lost child. They show parents holding an infant for the first and last time. They are documents of grief, but they are also documents of love. For the Victorians, these photographs were not disturbing. They were treasured keepsakes. Understanding this context is essential. It means that the idea of a post-mortem photograph is not, in itself, implausible. The question is whether this particular photograph is one of them. Grady returns to the wedding photograph with this knowledge. He points out specific details that have fueled the rumor. Adelina's posture is extraordinarily rigid. Even accounting for the stiffness required by long exposure times, her position seems more extreme than the others. Her hands are placed with precise symmetry, folded in a way that suggests deliberate staging. Her eyes, when magnified, appear less focused than those of her family members. There is a possibility that the photographer retouched them, adding highlights to make them appear more lifelike. This was a common practice in the era, done to brighten the eyes of both living and deceased subjects. Grady compares Adelina directly to Ricardo and Rebecca. They display subtle signs of animation. Ricardo's shoulders are slightly uneven, suggesting a natural, living posture. Rebecca's gaze, while serious, is focused on the camera lens. The contrast is noticeable. Grady concludes that it is plausible Adelina was being supported by a hidden posing stand. These stands were common tools. They were used for the living, who struggled to remain still during minute-long exposures. They were also used for the dead, who required support to remain upright. The evidence does not confirm death, but it does not rule it out either. But Dr. Thorne introduces a critical problem with the viral story. The claim is not simply that Adelina was deceased when the photograph was taken. The claim is that she had been buried the day before. This detail transforms the story from plausible to nearly impossible. To explain why, the investigation brings in Rylan Cross, a medical examiner with expertise in historical burial practices. Rylan explains that in 1895, embalming was not a standard practice, especially outside of urban centers. When someone died, the body was kept in the home. It was placed on a cooling board or surrounded by ice. Family and friends would visit for a wake or viewing. This could last 1 to 3 days. Then the body was buried. The idea of exhuming a buried body for a photograph is almost inconceivable. Legally, it would require permits. Socially, it would be seen as a profound violation. Religiously, it would be considered sacrilege in most Christian denominations. Practically, the physical state of a buried body, even after just 1 day, would make such a photograph deeply unpleasant, if not impossible. The buried detail appears to be a modern embellishment, added to make the story more gothic, more disturbing, more viral. Dr. Thorne proposes an alternative theory. What if Adelina was not dead, but gravely ill? 19th century records contain numerous accounts of what were called sickbed weddings. These were ceremonies performed when one partner was dying, often from tuberculosis, which was then called consumption. The marriage was conducted quickly, sometimes with the dying person propped up in bed, to legitimize the union or to ensure any children or inheritance would be recognized. This practice was especially common when pregnancy was involved. An ante-mortem photograph, taken before death but in the final stages of illness, would explain Adelina's appearance. The weakness from disease, the rigid posture, possibly supported by pillows or a brace, the distant, unfocused look of someone in pain or heavily sedated. The photograph would be a last, urgent record of their marriage. It would be tragic, but it would not be post-mortem. To move from theory to fact, the investigation must identify the family. This task falls to Sterling Navarro, a genealogist with experience tracing anonymous photographs. The challenge is enormous. The photograph has no names written on it, no studio mark, no location. Sterling explains the methodology. The goal is to search archives for an 1895 wedding that is linked to a death within days or weeks. The search begins in the region where the photograph is rumored to have originated, based on the style of the studio backdrop and the clothing. Sterling starts with marriage ledgers, cross-referencing them with death certificates. The work is slow and meticulous. Sterling is assisted by Kylo Rivers, a local archivist who knows the collections intimately. Together, they pull records from 1895, marriage licenses, census records, death certificates. They look for patterns. A marriage record for a couple in their 20s, followed immediately by a death certificate for the bride. They find several leads. A bride who died 3 months after her wedding, likely from childbirth complications. A groom who died 2 weeks after his marriage, possibly from an accident. But none of these match the tight timeline the viral story suggests. None of them match the photograph. The process takes weeks. False leads pile up. The frustration mounts. But then Sterling finds something promising. A marriage record for Adelina Santos and Ricardo Vargas. The date is June 1895. Days later, a death certificate is filed for Adelina Santos Vargas. The cause of death is listed as consumption. This could be it. The timeline is tight. The cause of death matches the sickbed wedding theory. Sterling and Kylo are cautiously optimistic. But Dr. Thorne issues a warning. This discovery proves only that a real-life tragedy occurred. It does not prove that this tragedy is connected to the viral photograph. The photograph could have been attached to this story later, by someone who found the sad coincidence and used it to craft a narrative. The myth could have been built on a real foundation, but that does not make the myth true. Sterling continues digging. The key is to trace the photograph itself, not just find a sad story. She works backward through the digital trail. Where did the photograph first appear? Who posted it? What was the original context? She spends hours on genealogy forums, historical photo collector sites, and antique dealer listings. Finally, she finds a thread from 2003. The photograph was posted by a user whose profile suggests they are a descendant of the family. The post includes names, Adelina Moretti and Ricardo Castellano, not Santos and Vargas. A different couple entirely. Sterling now has specific names. She contacts Kylo. With these names, the search can be targeted. Kylo pulls the marriage license. Adelina Moretti and Ricardo Castellano were married in August 1895. The location matches the suspected region. Now comes the crucial test. Kylo searches for Adelina's death certificate in 1895, then 1896, then 1897. There is no death certificate. Sterling moves to census records. She finds Adelina and Ricardo in the 1900 census. They are living together. They have 2 children. She finds them again in 1910, 4 children now, and again in 1920. The children are grown. Adelina and Ricardo are listed as ages 52 and 54. Sterling continues searching. She finds Adelina's death certificate. The date is 1943. She was 75 years old. The truth is now undeniable. Adelina lived a long life. She and Ricardo raised a family. She saw her children marry. She likely met grandchildren. She died nearly half a century after her wedding day. The entire story, the post-mortem bride, the burial, the sickbed wedding, is a complete fabrication. It is a piece of modern folklore attached to an anonymous family's precious photograph. But one question remains. If Adelina was perfectly healthy on her wedding day, why does she look so strange in the photograph? Why does she appear so rigid, so distant, so unlike the living people beside her? Grady returns to explain the technological and cultural factors. The first factor is exposure time. In 1895, photographic plates required long exposures. Even in good light, a subject might need to sit perfectly still for 30 seconds to a full minute. Any movement would blur the image. To achieve this, photographers used posing stands. These were metal frames with clamps and supports, hidden behind the subject. The stand would hold the head, the shoulders, the back. This allowed the subject to remain motionless without the exhausting effort of holding the position themselves. Every person in the photograph likely used such a stand. But some people, due to their height, build, or the angle of the shot, appear more rigid than others. Adelina may simply have been positioned in a way that made the stand's effect more visible. The second factor is orthochromatic film. This was the standard film stock in 1895. It was not sensitive to red light. This created strange effects on skin tones. Cheeks, which have red undertones, appeared blotchy or dark. Blue eyes, lacking red tones, appeared unnaturally light, sometimes almost white. This is why many Victorians appear pale and ghostly in photographs, even though they were perfectly healthy. The film simply could not capture the full spectrum of light. Adelina's skin tone and eye color, rendered through orthochromatic film, would have looked different from reality. The result was an eerie, washed-out appearance. The third factor is the photographer. Not every Victorian photographer was a master of their craft. Eduardo Sanchez, the name on the studio stamp on the back of the photograph, was likely a small-town photographer. His lighting setup may have been poor. The studio may have had dim, natural light or poorly positioned lamps. This would create harsh shadows, uneven illumination, and an overall flatness to the image. A more skilled photographer, with better equipment and more experience, would have produced a more flattering portrait. But for many families, the local photographer was the only option. They worked with what was available. Dr. Thorne adds a final cultural point. Modern viewers are conditioned by snapshot photography. We expect smiles. We expect candid moments. We expect people to look relaxed, natural, and animated. But for the Victorians, a photograph was not a casual snapshot. It was a formal event, akin to sitting for a painted portrait. The subjects wore their best clothes. They went to a studio. They sat still for minutes. The resulting image was meant to be a permanent, serious record. Smiling was considered inappropriate. It made the subject look frivolous or foolish. The unsmiling, rigid, formal appearance that modern viewers find unsettling was, to the Victorians, the correct and respectable way to be photographed. The 1895 wedding photograph is not a ghost story. It is a human story. It is a document of Adelina and Ricardo at the beginning of their shared life. The mystery is solved. The unsettling details are not clues to a Gothic tragedy. They are simple artifacts of 19th century life and technology. Long exposure times, orthochromatic film, formal cultural norms, a small-town photographer with limited skill. These are the reasons Adelina looks the way she does. The myth was created because the past is a foreign country. Its customs, its technologies, and its aesthetics can seem strange to modern eyes. When we do not understand the context, we fill in the gaps with stories. We create narratives that fit our expectations. And in the age of the Internet, those narratives spread faster and further than the truth. The viral story of the post-mortem bride is a reminder of how easily misinformation can take hold. A real photograph, a real family, and a real moment were transformed into a macabre legend. The story was compelling because it seemed plausible. Post-mortem photography was real. Victorian death customs were different from ours. The details seemed to fit. But a compelling story is not the same as a true story. The truth required research. It required experts. It required patience. And it required a willingness to challenge assumptions. Adelina Moretti and Ricardo Castellano deserved better than to have their wedding day turned into a ghost story. Their photograph was meant to be a celebration, a record of their union, a document to be passed down through their family. Instead, it became a viral curiosity, shared by strangers who believed she was dead. The investigation has restored the truth. Adelina was alive. She was healthy. She was beginning a long and full life. The photograph is not a tragedy. It is a beginning. What other historical photographs or viral mysteries deserve investigation? What other stories have been twisted by time, by misunderstanding, or by the Internet's love of the macabre? There are thousands of old photographs in archives, attics, and online collections. Each one has a story. Some of those stories are true. Some are myths. The work of separating the two is never finished. If this investigation has been valuable, if the truth matters, then the work must continue. History is not a collection of spooky tales. It is a record of real people, living real lives. And every person in every photograph, no matter how strange they may appear to modern eyes, deserves to have their story told truthfully.